Okay, let's get into the outstanding story of Osiris, his myth, symbols, and significance in ancient Egypt. Most people know of Osiris as the green-skinned god of the underworld, lord of the afterlife, and judge of the dead. He is one of the best known gods from ancient Egypt. And let's see if we can see a few parallels when we describe him, but it gets pretty deep here. His story provides his followers with reassurance for life after death, that the Nile would keep their lands fertile and abundant, and it was an inspiration for what a king should be. He is the only deity that is referred to in ancient Egyptian writings simply as God, a surefire indication that Osiris was both powerful and popular. Being considered a good god, Osiris was also accredited with the teaching of humanity agriculture, the arts, religion, laws, and moralities. And his followers really enjoyed holding festivals in his honor. Well, a few of those things stand out and sound very Jesus-like, and also there were people that didn't really have a king anymore that were expecting someone to come along, which was supposed to be another Jacob, but it didn't work out that way, did it? Even though there were prophecies and so on and everything. In fact, the second coming was Titus, and I've gone over that quite a bit, and Josephus even confirms it, and it was all wrong, supposedly, and it led to these people. But and that led to Roman Catholic Church. But here at the end of this also, it tells you that he's powerful and he's a good God, but he's the God of the judge of the dead and the underworld. And that's really, you know, against what we think of today in a Christian type atmosphere. But he's also credited with teaching humanity agriculture, the arts, religion, laws, and morality, it says. But in my last video, I also talked about how he's accredited with papyrus and paper, and therefore writing too. And if you put that together here, this last part sounds like he's really Thoth. And so is Thoth Osiris? And have they dissected the original idea of Thoth into all these different things? Ding. So let's get into this, because it's kind of telling as we do somewhat. And I'll do my little adding on flavor in the stew. Osiris and the Pharaoh. Some scholars have suggested that Osiris may have had his origins in Lower Egypt, down in the delta towards the Mediterranean, as a very ancient king of Busiris. There's a city known as Busiris there. And it would really make sense somehow, but however, it seems more likely that he was the local god of Busiris, personifying the underworld fertility there. Either way, by 2400 BC, Osiris's role and reach had expanded, and he became linked to the pharaoh. This connection was threefold. First, his story had evolved to include his role as the first king of Egypt. And so this has looked like that, well, everybody says it's Menes and armor and stuff that went on. Nah. The Egyptians went off this thing that he was the original Adam, if you will, and the original king of Egypt. And he had set forth the standard. He is the one who established the values for later kings to uphold. Second, he was considered the king's father because he was Isis's husband, and she was said to be the pharaoh's mother, as in the pharaoh was supposed to have been her son, created out of the myth that we'll go into shortly, where he is Horus, and that would have been his offspring, right? Finally, third, Osiris was the higher aspect the pharaoh sought to become after death. And so you can see that in this small concept they have here, once it's developed, that what they're doing is saying that the Father hopes to be as good as the Son becomes, hopefully as good as the Father, and there gets a resurrection. I can understand it from that point of view. I'm half the man that my father was, and I consider him to be a great man. But you strive for these things, right? And not everybody can be king, but you strive for these things. And so what's a king supposed to be? Well, he's well-liked, good. He has all these good attributes about him. And the strange thing there is that that sounds more a little bit like Pluto. And it probably does for a reason. Because Pluto wasn't considered to be a Satan kind of Hades kind of guy. You know, Hades can be kind of an asshole. But Pluto wasn't. And he really was, you know, someone that led you to Elysian fields, if you will, and so on. And the afterlife was there. And so, in some ways, what we think of now as the dichotomy of heaven and hell was one thing, and there was either that thing or there was nothing, the void. And you had this afterlife that would have been what we think of in hell today. But we've recently talked about the devil and hell and the goddess hell even, and where that really comes from. And therefore we understand that that isn't even, that's something more modern that people have pulled, right? And got a second layer and an extra skin around that onion that they felt was impenetrable, but lo and behold. So he was the higher aspect that the Pharaoh sought to become after death, but he was supposed to have been upholding the values of Horus during his life. But if you look at the Book of the Dead, he goes all the way through, and then whenever he ends, whenever he's had his heart weighed versus a feather and so on, and going through his trials, he ends up at Osiris, and at this point, he has made it. And then the book of coming forth by day becomes a reality. Here's a depiction of him quite often seen. It's been recolorized somewhat, but here's his color. It's two plumes on the white crown. So he did have a white crown with him. But he's green, so we was Egyptians, we was Martians? No, it doesn't work that way. He's supposed to be the green of the fields that regrow every year. Because the rest of that crap's pretty much desert. It doesn't really get green. Oh, if it ever rains there, it does. But it's kind of why I've talked about recently they didn't really have a storm god that fits in their theogony that comes and clicks into place like everybody else did, that fits with it because of the ancient farming techniques and things and how you would go off seasons and how it all works together. Their season worked a little different and worked off the flooding of the Nile and wasn't involved with that storm god, Baal Hadad. So here's your depiction of him, and he's usually shown like this and wrapped up already as a mummy quite often and stuff on his little dais. And so a son of gods, the beginnings of the Osiris myth. The name Osiris is the Greek form of the Egyptian name Asir, and we've talked about this recently, how that's Wasir or Asar, and that's very similar to Asar Haddon. And I've showed you that it make connections like crazy with that, but how, you know, I got into a lot of this extra that really threw me another notch was Carl Sagan. He's somebody that I knew was extremely Jewish, but at the same time he was past it, very much so, hearing him talk. And then he came out with a movie, and it was called Contact. And in this movie, the person that gave forth the idea that questionable whether it came from heaven or if it came from him and this, that, and the other was again a man who's had initials in his name, but it was S.R. Haddon. And you're like, what? And it's like, yeah, he threw it right in there. Yeah, and it clicked whenever it clicked for me. And it's like, wow. And then his idea of what the afterlife was, and that's what that was doing. And she went and saw her dad, and they said this is how it's been done for millions of years, and da da da, and all the things that goes along with it. If you haven't seen it, it's a pretty good movie. It's got all right, all right, all right in it. But Asar. Now, I'll try to get into it later again too, see if I can bring it back around. But sometimes that S has an H on it, and so you can get a Shar out of it too. And so, wouldn't there be a female counterpart who might be Asherah? Oh, snap. And so you start to get an idea that, well, that linguistics goes definitely together, but it doesn't seem to show up here. Well, it does. It shows up to be the wife of God. That's strange. Also, they mentioned earlier where he's mentioned solely as God, right? And I think that's misspeaking, because I know there are times the God happy, they just say he's the God happy and don't necessarily put an epitaph after the end of it. And I think what they're referring to is quite often anytime they refer to a God, they say the God of this, and they throw epitaphs onto it. And quite often he just says, and it says, boom, the God Osiris. Like, you're all aware of what we talking about, that kind of situation. So it does give a blanket in a way that he says, but in a way I don't think it's exclusively done like, oh no, they never did it before. But quite often there are epitaphs on everybody, and in his version it just kind of says, we're talking about when we say Zeus. We don't have to put the lightning bolt at the end of it or anything, do we? Okay. And so Asar, which may mean powerful or almighty, and so we get a God Almighty situation. And one who sees the throne, or the one who presides on his throne. Later on, Osiris became known as Un-Nefer, to open, appear, or to make manifest good things or beauty. In fact, Nefer means beauty, as in Nefertiti means beauty has come to us. And that's what that Nefer goes with, to appear. So this means more powerful, this God Almighty, or most powerful situation. You look at that, that's in the Bible too, and it's known as El Shaddai. And if you'll look, I've made videos about this before, but people have correlated El Shaddai with Asherah, the goddess of many breasts, and that correlates with, the female goddess that has her counterpart all in there. The only strange thing is that Ugarit, in ancient Ugarit, they found some tablets that ends up showing you that says Yahweh and his Asherah. And so what's that? Well, she's the queen of heaven. But due to the theogony and the way everything broke down, they ended up being the gods of hell. Okay, let me hit this from a totally different viewpoint if you can. Let me wipe that chalkboard clean just for a second over here, or I'll just step over to this clean area. If people live for 100 years, let's hope, right? But eternity is somewhat longer than that. There are talks about how the gods of the underworld were the winners, and that would make devil the god of the, no, but hold on, there's no devil. Back out of that situation. Come back down this road over here. Follow my torch. If they have you for eternity, and during your life they only have you for then, and in your eternity state you're supposed to be cleansed and not so much different than that, then wouldn't hell be heaven? I.e. vice versa? If the Satan thing that you think of in the modern religion, so let's back up and go down that road, we'll come back, leave a torch and a marker. If this god of the underworld is supposed to be bad and all those things, and God wanted you to be punished because of the bad things you had done, and he sends you there and he does that, so he's still doing God's bidding. He was God's angel and da da da, and now they're back together again, like back at the very first of the Bible, where they're kind of hanging around together. That's strange. We'd have to think of it along those lines somewhat. I mean, you'd think that if he was the bad guy, then if you had done bad, he would be glad to see you. So this whole idea of hell, it just falls apart. Take a deep breath. Let's come back and go down here. Here's that torch again. Because there's a beauty in death, and it is of the most powerful because we all fear death in a way. So, in that fact, can you get it? Little out of that. It's a little different flavor of the stew. I know it just looked like a regular soup, but until you take a sip of it, it's like, no, that's not the same thing. Hopefully I conveyed that correctly. So he doesn't show up, too, at the very first of everything. It takes till, like I've said before in the other two videos, I think I've done 3 total on him and mentioned him in probably a dozen, and made connections. But that it doesn't come on strong till about the 5th dynasty. It goes to the 5th and 6th, and then as it decays out of the early kingdom there, it goes into that first intermediate period. And at that point, they've already embraced him by that point. But it doesn't seem like they've really got the theogony figured out before then, as I mentioned. So it says from the 5th dynasty, circa 2015, 2513 to 2374 BC. Just jumped past a few numbers there, didn't I? From then on, Osiris was also a member of the Ennead, aka the Great Ennead and the Ennead of Heliopolis. So the city of the sun and the Ennead that they had going on there. And as I had talked, it looks like they've blended 3 Enneads together and ditched some people and then reintegrated him as well. Now he's the grandkid of, and so, I'm not going to try to break and dissect it into the nth degree. There are guys that have gone far too deep into that already, and it's monotonous. But so this Ennead, though, is really their own little Olympus, if you will, in their situations, but whose influence spread to the rest of Egypt as well. And that's also when Osiris became known as the first child of Geb and Nut. And so Geb and Nut are the sky and the ground. And so this is supposed to have been like effectively Adam, if you would, or the first man, or the first Titan, if you want to go with a Titanomachy here and get that situation that falls apart. And so you could look at their 3 and say, well, you could put it here as 3 together, but they kept them all semi-separated. Yeah, it's kind of odd. But over time, certain people took over, and you don't even notice some names that were in the earliest dynasties even getting mentioned anymore hardly, like Montu and things like that, right? Geb and Nut were the children of Shu and Tefnut, the creation of the first god Atum, or Adam. Osiris' siblings were Set, or Seth, and Nephthys, and Isis. And I did one about Nephthys and the connection here 2.5 years ago now, and I think I've still got it pulled up because I've got a wiki page still pulled up about Nephthys, and because I was going to run through it again after some other connection like this is made, and may do it here shortly. And Isis, so the little triad here off that. These 3 beings played key roles in the Osiris myth. And hey, looks like a goddamn Barbie doll. Check this out. There's a picture of it, and let's see, what we have is Isis, and the other one here, and then I guess this is Horus and Osiris, and a full connections around the side. I wonder why that looks almost rubbed out and then redrawn. No, it could just be some bullshit anyhow. So that's the outer coffin of Tyweret, depicting Osiris, Isis, and Nephthys. You can see they draw women always in pale, and men are drawn in red ochre. It's a symbology that's seen all over the Mediterranean and stuff. It's a, once they became farmers and all this stuff, a woman didn't have to toil, and so she could be kept fair-skinned. In fact, it's really desired by these people, all of them. In fact, I recently did another video here about somebody from the same dynasty area, and they're talking about how fair-skinned she was and so on. And they even had said that she was perhaps what the third pyramid was about. It'll be out by the time I make this, I'm sure. I'll make sure they come out in the right order, I think. The myth of Osiris and Isis, and then Set. Most people are familiar with it somewhat, but let's roll through it again, kind of an Egyptology 101, 102, dash a 3 in there, and a little bit of Gnosis. There are some variations on that Osiris myth, but generally the story begins with Osiris as the king of the ancient Egyptians, either through providing his wife and sister Isis with the power to rule in his place when he was away spreading civilization, or through the other's pure envy. Osiris angered his brother Set. Set resented Osiris' success and is said to have conspired to kill his brother after Set's wife, Nephthys, pretended to be Isis and seduced Osiris. Then you can tell they look exactly alike, but then again, just about every woman looks totally alike, and every man looks totally alike. And of course, the Egyptians never draw a fat person or anything else. And they found some mummies where they go, this person was heavy, and so on. There are some statues that look heavy, like Himwenu, the architect of the Great Pyramid, and so on. And you can tell he's got a little double chin going on. But generally, like I've said before, they kept to an artistic standpoint that was the same all the way through it, and people really kind of look the same. But in the earliest dynasties, here and back, you can find those crystal blue-eyed statues. And if you look at, not the pharaohs, they've already kind of got locked in, but you can see some variation to where you can really kind of see him in there. If you knew him, I would believe that you'd be able to recognize it. And if you set them all beside each other, you can see the differences that are in them, and especially in the earliest of dynasties, and a few other select situations. But the scribes seem to be somewhat realistic. They're the ones that have the crystal blue eyes and things like that on them. And that reserve heads kind of give forth an idea of what they look like before they were made up to look like a god and all kind of cartooned out like they were. So, Osiris angered his brother Set. Set resented Osiris' success and is said to have conspired to kill his brother after Set's wife, Nephthys, pretended to be Osiris and seduced him. And there's this weird thing, and everybody's all like, oh, there's incest and this, that, and the other. Well, listen, there's a idea of a cosmos and an earth, and then it spawns forth these few people, and if there's going to be anything comes out, there's going to have to be an incest situation. That's the way it works. Everybody's all like, well, no, listen. It's that simple. Even when you have 12 gods of Olympus, they're all related too, aren't they? I'll be damned. You can't get away from it. That's simple, but let's get off that idea. So, in some, the god Anubis, by the way, was the result of that union. And some versions say that Set also lusted after Isis. So there was this whole little thing, but if you'll look at the way that works, it kind of makes the world go around, and Set the sunset chases Venus, who peekaboos up and then goes away, and then shows up, and then when the sun comes up, goes away. Peekaboo, right? This is astrotheology, if you will. They're Set. They make him look pretty much like an aardvark, anteater, if you will. All the creatures around there, animistic or whatever. So again, he's done red ochre, not quite as pale as the women. He has a tail himself. Of course, the gods and this, that, and the other. He has a little forked prong, which he can use, I guess, to gig frogs with and things, huh? Set Osiris' brother and another important ancient Egyptian deity, based on the New Kingdom tomb paintings. They're going to show that girl again. It is an interesting side note. Neptunes was believed to have been barren before she came pregnant with Osiris' offspring. And that's a strange thing, because if you've studied the Bible, you find this little barren thing, and this happens too in there, and you can make a weird connection if you so wish to. But that, if that's true, then he may have been impotent in some way, and the other type of union made her get pregnant somehow. Or, well, if he has a child through her, then the other one, then no, of course not. But it's strange. So the yin and then the yang makes it work. Well, that's how you get the yin and the yang. You have to take it from two separate entities. Can't make it come out of just one. Well, you easily could. Well, it did the step before this, didn't it? But that step is mythical, in the sky and the earth and all of that. Hopefully y'all are following me. Interesting side note, though. This part of the myth was later linked to the Egyptian desert flowers, which didn't bloom for years until a large flood. Osiris helped the barren land, Neptunes, become fertile and provided them with life, Anubis. Myths also said Anubis honored his father Osiris by giving him the position as the god of the underworld. And so that's kind of how that fits. Look at the lips on that girl. That was much bigger than an Egyptian statue, but Set soon put a plan in motion to get his revenge, though. According to Plutarch, Set either drowned or killed Osiris, so Set should actually be a hippopotamus. Let's move on. The story is often said to include a beautiful chest tailor-made to Osiris's size. Set ordered the creation of the chest and then invited his brother to a banquet with a bunch of people there. During the feast, he offered the remarkable chest to anyone that they could have it as theirs if they could fit inside of it. Everyone tried it, but he couldn't fit. No one could fit, and this is the Cinderella situation. Ding. But only Osiris fit inside. Now, the moment Osiris lay down in the chest, Set nailed the lid closed. Then he sealed the chest with molten lead and bitumen in some stories, so it's just like a sarcophagus is done, and along with his brother, threw it into the Nile. Now, the chest, which some say inspired the idea for the Egyptian sarcophagus, and others say that concept of right there in the bitumen boat that floated down the river and things was echoed again in Sargon the Great, with a basket with him being cast, but then also re-enlivened supposedly back here in Egypt again with the Moses idea. Right? We're all familiar with that. But sarcophagus with this mold to fit the body, chest and a chest and a chest, right? It was carried out to the sea from the Nile out to the delta into the Mediterranean, and then it came to rest in a tamarisk tree, which is symbolic, growing near Byblos in Phoenicia. What? Yep, the story goes all the way into Phoenicia. Hold on, it gets stranger. The tree grew around the god in the coffin, and he remained there until he died. No one found him, and he rested up against a tree. And then how long would it take for a tree to grow around a coffin to where you kind of don't see it anymore? Well, it gets worse than that. Stay with that idea. The tree grew around that coffin, though, right? And the local king later decided he liked the same tree, and with no knowledge of Osiris being inside it, had it turned into a column for his palace. And so an ancient Phoenician king would have used that. Now, funny, that's not columns of stone, but that's columns of wood. And I'll make a little connection here for the only place you find in the Bible that hasn't been taken out in the Old Testament of Asherah. It talks about it in a few places, but one where is Asherah is the name of the pole helping hold up the tabernacle. And you talk about these pillars that they have of Boaz and stuff that go with the masons and these poles. And if you take it back from stonework back to where we were doing stuff with major woodwork, I've shown you totem pole situations that are up there in ancient Proto-Indo-European lands that get taught to the people that ended up coming over and becoming the Amerindians and stuff. And a lot of the totem poles, of course, are up near Alaska anyhow. And it shows you that still wrapping up into there. But poles are done for a different thing, and originally there would be wooden gods and then stone gods. It almost goes through a Three Little Pigs situation. So here's an idealism of Isis here in the back, and she's shown with the wings of the sun disk situation. In fact, the sun disk is right in front of her midsection there in the body, and on top of her head with the bull horns on it. And then the green giant looking guy in the middle is Osiris again with his hat on, and the plumes aren't done correctly, but we still know that's him. And man, they've got an oversized cap on him. But this is the guy over here on the right, and if you look, that's that pot pipe looking thing going on, and he's coming up and spilling the waters and pouring out libations to him. Ramses III, censing and libating before Ptah Sokar Osiris, protected by winged Isis, seen from tomb of Ramses III, right? I could go on, but let's go. Isis had been out looking for her beloved and eventually happened upon the palace of the Phoenicians, if you're still with me. There she was taken in and cared for the king's children while disguised as an old woman. So this is part of one of those tales that you're secretly an old woman, you're not the goddess or whatever, you know, I'm an old hag, ha ha ha, secret. When she revealed herself as the goddess after saving one of the king's sons, the king offered her whatever she wanted. She chose the column, and thus Isis found Osiris's remains inside of the pillar. So imagine how far-fetched that sounds. That he floated in a special coffin into the tree, wrapped around into the tree. That guy got it made into a pillar for him, but it was still in there, couldn't see it. She got it, and then ta-da, inside of that is that. Well, people have said that what was done there is that she carved the effective Ka statue that they used to have that are made out of wood, like Hor-Aha statue and the earliest statues that have those blue eyes in them. For the plastered kind of built ones are the scribes in a Buddha situation, but all the other ones are done in wood. And they're standing up and starting to take the first step, like Coppers and a few others that are shown there. Yeah, and there's also other princes, Rahotep, and other guys that have them too. But nevertheless, so comes out of a column. Did it take and carve out of that column the statue to redo it? Did this happen in the 5th dynasty or so? And are they deifying somebody from the very first origins of dynastic Egypt? A ding. Revival, desecration, and resurrection. The goddess returned to Egypt with her husband and worked to reconstitute his physical body. Then Isis transformed herself into a kite bird, and she used magic words and the beating of her wings to revive him, and then conceived a child with him. That child was Horus. She then hid her husband's body and went off to raise her son. So after she did that, she just ditched him, right? Like a black widow or whatever. Well, don't they kill them? And Manasses, they kill them. So, a little different, I guess, but yeah, it seems like she just ditches him, but she's going to raise up her kid. And this parallels, like a few other places, but different. And some people say it's for a reason, and I don't want to go mumble. But she turns herself into a kite bird, more like a female falcon kite. And the only thing he didn't have of his body after she reconstituted him is his penis, and which was eaten by a special fish that no one's allowed to eat. Therefore, she makes him a golden one, and then flies as the bird and lands down onto it. It's amazing, as the first tales of the Bible, whenever the glory of God comes down, the word is ruach, and if you look at it, it looks to a lot of people like the ancient symbolic words of it, drawn in pictographs from Proto-Phoenicians. Comes out to looking like a spaceship hovering above water or something, and got wind down below it. But the concept that they use is wind, like it looks like a bird landing also. So if you had a bird landing, taking off, this, that, and the other, it started everything. Concept kind of works out of that. I can see a parallel into it. So she had that child with him, and that child was Horus. She then hid the husband's body and went off to raise her son. And let me get this little controller here going again. And so looking at these golden statues here, we can see Osiris in the middle, Horus on the left, and Isis on the right. You can tell their Caucasian features pretty damn easy, but Horus, Osiris, and Isis. And that's from the time of King Osarkon. And people have said Osarkon has to do with Osiris and Osar, and that's one of the few kings that really has a directive name that works off of Osiris directly and not indirectly, like basically everyone is supposed to be reborn as Osiris as they go into the afterlife and take that position. Set encountered Osiris's body while he was out hunting one day, because she just left it out there, I guess, huh? To prevent his brother from gaining the burial that he deserved, the enraged Set cut Osiris's body up into various pieces with differing numbers according to the text, 12 or 14, which is half a lunar month, or 16, which is the ideal height for a rise in the water level in cubits of the Nile, or 42, and level 42, the number of the nomes of Egypt. The body parts were then scattered across Egypt. Isis discovered what had been done and gathered up all the pieces of Osiris's body that she could. The only part she could not find was his penis, which had been eaten by an Oxyrhynchus fish, making it a forbidden food in ancient Egypt, and some people didn't eat this. With the help of Neptunes and Anubis, Isis patched up Osiris's body the best that she could and prepared it for a proper burial. That's when they created the first mummy and Anubis became associated with embalmers. And so this, see how that's working. And a protector over the dead, and a dog or a jackal would work in that way, and they said they'd see them all the time out on the burial grounds. When the other gods, or at least Ra, saw this, they resurrected Osiris, but because he was incomplete, he could no longer rule in the land of the living, so he became the ruler and judge of the underworld. Horus eventually avenged his father by killing Set and becoming the new king of Egypt. And so, was there a time that Seth was the king? Well, yeah, there's Seth Peribsen and things that went off that. I've shown that in some of my videos. But this idea that he was incomplete, so he could not rule. That's that rule where, they knock the nose off the statues and then, oh, it's supposed to ruin you in the afterlife. If you don't have your toe, they made a little fake toe to go for it. Everything, you're supposed to be somewhat complete. Always there's a contradiction somewhere, though, because they circumcised themselves. So, did you keep your foreskin your whole life and have it go with you too, or what the hell goes on with that? Because, oops. So here on the left is Isis, on the right is Anubis, and in the middle is somebody from the Ptolemaic age, and you can see that the way they did this cross-hatching here, that's whenever they cross-hatch wrap the mummies like they did. And the olive branch little idea here. And so this is a shroud from the time of the Ptolemaic dynasty showing Osiris Anubis with the deceased man. Osiris as the Egyptian underworld deity. Where are we at here? 41. Am I going to make it? No chance in hell, people. It will be a part 2. Osiris as the Egyptian underworld deity. Osiris was not an underworld or duat deity to be feared. In fact, his reputation was a good and benevolent king, probably created a sense of security for people nearing the end of their lives. Although people did not need to fear the deity himself, it was no easy task to enter his domain. You have to go through hell to get there, but once you got there, he felt you were worthy. A decent burial, spells from the Book of the Coming Forth by Day, better known today as the Book of the Dead, and the Book of the Gates, and amulets were provided for the dead to help them make the dangerous journey through the underworld to the Hall of Judgment, where their heart would eventually be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, or truth. And generally all these spells they would send them with is almost like cheat codes. And there, in fact, would be in part of the spell, which would basically say that I have done this, I already did this, I have done that, I have done this. And it's like, well, you're fixing to face that. Well, it says I did it, I completed it, because all the other things are in place. We're just going to go ahead and go, yep, all right, now what's next? It was pretty much guaranteed that a person who made it that far would be welcome into the afterlife, since the ancient Egyptian judgment did not seek perfection. Instead, it looked for balance. If the person could convince benevolent Osiris that he or she deserved to be there, they could stay. So I think we're going to end it right here on this picture. This is a picture of Judgment of the Dead in the presence of Osiris. Here's Osiris at the very end. Here's Isis and Neptunes. Here at the end again. Here's Horus. Here is the weighing of the heart and the tabulating on the book of life of Thoth here. And if they don't make it, this creature here eats your heart. Here's Anubis, but here is Anubis also again. But this is the same person as here. What they're showing you is that they came to here and they did this. Bing, he checked out. I did this, and here I am, and I go ahead and I meet the God, right?